this week, we will be having a specific focus on crime in our country here on Morning Live and throughout the SABC News Channel platform. And this morning, we were meant to be in one of the communities in Johannesburg to bring you a live discussion as we usually do. But unfortunately, the threat of violence and shooting has brought us to this space because it was brought to our attention, and we were told that as SABC News, it would be safer for us not to enter said community. Now, as a result, we've decided not to totally abandon the project, but rather to have a live studio discussion with a national focus on gang criminality and, of course, the fear that it instills in residents in our various communities. Now, according to the crime statistics for January to March, we have seen about 240 gang-related cases of murder and 21 cases of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. These were reported to police stations across the country. But let's take a look now at some of the areas, 4 areas in particular that we'll be focusing on this morning. So we start in the Western Cape in Mitchell's Plain. And these are just some stats just to give you a snapshot of what is happening in these communities. 1,624 incidents of drug and gang-related crime reported in Mitchell's Plain. About 18 incidents of drug-related crime reported at Mitchell's Plain every single day. And then 273 gang-related attempted murders. This is the 7th top national police station for community-reported serious crimes. And from January to March this year, we had 1,771 reported serious crime cases in the Mitchell's Plain area. Now, moving from there, let's take it to Galvandale in the Eastern Cape. And here we see September 2023, 5 people fatally shot by gunmen. And then January to March this year, there were 5 reported gang-related attempted murders in the Eastern Cape. January, there was the incident where a police officer was gunned down, and in that same month we saw the community marching against police killings in the Eastern Cape. And still in January, we had that story of a mother who was imprisoned for 25 years for the murder of her drug-addicted son for an insurance claim. So this was in the Eastern Cape. Let's take it now to Gauteng. Westbury is the focus area here. January to March this year, 5 gang-related cases of attempted murder. And then in July, there was a 19-year-old female who was arrested for dealing drugs. Reported high gang-related violence in this area, and it's something that is constant. And also, you'll remember back in 2023, when Bheki Cele was the Minister of Police, there was an imbizo to combat crime and gangsterism, and of course, sustained pressure by law enforcement authorities in that area to try and deal with the problem. But that has since vanished. And then moving to KwaZulu-Natal and focusing on Wentworth, where we see constant gun violence in this area. In May 2024, a shooting incident occurred outside Woodville Flats, resulting in 1 fatality. And then in March this year, a 20-year-old was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for the murder of a teenager. And this month, 2 brothers gunned down while attending a funeral service of a relative. And last month, we saw 1 person injured in a shooting incident. So we, of course, are going to take this to a panel discussion now. And we will be joined by various people from those specific communities just to help us take a look at what is going on in these communities. And also, whilst doing so, interrogate some of the factors that may have led to what we see with the gangsterism taking root in specific areas. And one would say traditionally we knew this to be true in some areas, but now that has of course moved. So we joined virtually by the panel of guests that you see on our screen now. And we have Norman Jantjes, who's the chairperson of the Mitchell's Plain Community Forum in the Western Cape. Also Sherwin Nel, a community leader from Gelvandale in the Eastern Cape. Celeste King, King joins us from KZN. She is a youth activist and community member in Wentworth. And Lynn Wykes is a community worker from Westbury here in Gauteng. And thank you to all our guests for your time this morning. And let me start in the Western Cape, if I may. Just looking at the situation as it pertains to the Cape Flats, Norman, and what we hear. And this has been an ongoing story for so many years, where we hear of people literally running the gauntlet in certain areas of the Cape Flats just to get through everyday tasks. So what is the situation right now pertaining to gangsterism, would you say?
Hi, Sakina. Yeah, in terms of Mitchell's Plain, we have the first 3 months of this year, January, February, March, we had an average of 15 murders a month. So, and then of course, the attempted murders is about double of that. And these days, what happens in Mitchell's Plain, most of the shootings is drive-by shootings. And there's up to 20 bullets per person. So the gangs want to make sure that the targets are deceased. There must be no doubt of the outcome of that shooting. And normally there's mass murders. There's no one particular person targeted. Is a group of people. And then there's also the problem of innocent people, children, women, becoming victims of these shooting incidents. And most of these shooting incidents appears to be about drug territory. So and then there's also a lot of contestation to take the market of Mitchell's Plain and other areas. So I think drugs appears to be one of the main drivers of gun violence and gangsterism.
And Lynn, if I can come to you in Westbury. So we were out in Eldorado Park last week, and we heard some really, really harrowing stories from some of the activists in the community. For one, we were told about a 12-year-old girl who was running guns for gangs between Orange Farm and Eldorado Park. And as startling as that may seem, if you think about it, it makes sense, because nobody's going to think that a 12-year-old girl is running guns. So it seems as though the modus operandi is changing all the time for the gangsters.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to just start off by saying that I grew up in Westbury, and I taught at the local high schools, and I subsequently went back and started an ECD community center in Westbury. So I'm there every day, and I see the impact that violence has on our children, on our community members. Not a day goes by that there's not shooting, and you're absolutely right when you say that they are becoming younger. We know that at our schools, even from primary schools, children are organizing themselves into gangs. And when they get into high schools, the grade sixes, they run havoc at the high schools because they are organized. And they are involved in some of these criminal activities. And yes, it does make sense to use the younger ones, because if they do get arrested for any misdemeanors, the parents come and fetch them from jail, and they don't have to go into jail, obviously, because they are still young. So yeah, the community is under siege in Westbury. As of November 2024, community members report 70 deaths and still counting.
And then just moving to Galendale, Sherwin, speak to us about the situation there, because this is another one of those communities where the gangsterism and crime that goes attendant with it has become entrenched.
Good morning, Zakina. Good morning to your viewers. Thanks for having me. The situation is really dire in our community at the moment. We find over 100 deaths since the start of the year. The vicious cycle of poverty continues and it perpetuates, and we see a rise in the number of younger youth joining gangs. And for us to understand this, we really need to get to understand the hierarchy of gangsterism and how it works and how they operate. And it's become so attractive for youngsters to join gangs because of the lack of opportunities that we find in this community in particular. Recently, we did some oversight visits to the police stations, and it was really sad to see the lack of resources in our community. And then one has to wonder how there's such a slow response to eradicate gangsterism and the violence that continues to perpetuate in our communities.
To Wentworth now, and Celeste, just from your perspective as a youth activist, how bad is the gangsterism situation in your area?
Good morning, viewers. Thanks for having me. Well, in my community, it's really, really bad. The profound of a wild negative spread has really affected our community, especially as with the youth, because now we have this young age that are joining into these gangs, like 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds that are joining these gangs. And because they are coming from poverty background, they're looking for this belonging. And then you have these older gang people that recruit, showing them love. And these young ones think, okay, this is the path and this is where the love is, because they're coming from broken homes. So it's really scary, because even like when we do run these programs and speak, with these younger ones, you can see the range in their eyes, the anger in their eyes, and it's kind of like scary and makes it hard for us, that organization even do like proper various rate of the gang violence is really scary, and we can't in areas because of there being like a high rate of
And I just want to pick up on that point, because both Sherwin and Celeste, you touch on this issue of poverty. Now, I want us to just go into that a little bit more. This intergenerational poverty, because that is the reality, versus the intentional criminal recruitment of young people into these gangs. And I think it's important that we speak to that, because does this mean that everyone who is poor would then find themselves recruited into a gang because they come from a background that is perhaps, less than what they would like it to be? Let's just talk about that, because one hears that a lot, but how is the community dealing with that? And I want to start with you, Sherwin, because you raised it first, and then I'll give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on this.
Yeah, no, thank you again for that question. I don't think it's an exclusive problem when we talk about poverty, but it seems to be a more common contributor to the involvement of young people. There's a lack of opportunities, we find that, like I said, the vicious cycle of poverty perpetuates from one generation to the next. And because of desperation, sometimes people have to get involved in criminal activity. There's a lack of opportunities in our community. And I believe there's a deliberate lack of opportunities. Specifically, this community, they've been marginalized, they've been forgotten. You would find influx of youngsters standing on street corners, and the gangsters know this. They prey on this. They understand the desperation of these youngsters, and they make sure that they offer them something that let's call it the ideal world will not offer them. And it's so easy to get involved. It's much easier to get involved in criminal activity than to access opportunities. There's also a lack of access for our youngsters in this community. There's some serious issues that some of these youngsters have to deal with, over and above the fact that they come from bad backgrounds where poverty, like I said, perpetuates. So it's a problem that we need to really address, and a problem that we need to look at, the lack of opportunities for youngsters, the vicious cycle of poverty that continues. the lack of opportunities, you would find that some of these youngsters, as young as 9, 10 years old, the schooling system has failed them. They get rejected already at that age, and then they find themselves a target. And it just continues. It's just a sad reality that we see in our communities.
But Lynn, I want to come to you on that point. If Sherwin says the schooling system has failed them, can we speak to that as someone who was in that sector? But also, I would imagine at 9, 10 years old, there should be a great deal of parental involvement still and care over that child. So what is happening if we have 9 and 10-year-olds being recruited, Lynn?
I agree with what Sherwin is saying, absolutely. I also want to say that I don't think we can highlight one area on what is causing the gangsterism in our communities. I know that we feel as if our schools have failed our children because many of them get turned away. But truly from an education perspective, we find that our teachers are totally overwhelmed in the classroom because of the drugs. Teachers and gangsterism. Teachers live in fear because drug lords are operating at the schools. They have their corners. They have their team members. So teachers live in fear as well as the other learners. Then we also have to remember that from an education perspective, some of these parents, when the teachers discipline these children, the parents will come in and warn the teachers to back off, to leave their children alone. So I don't think that we can put the blame squarely on our schools. It's just a combination of factors that has an impact on gangsterism in our schools. We know academically as well, many children have dropped out because parents have either moved them to better schools out of our communities. We know that the academic standard has dropped because of gangsterism. Many children don't come to school. Absenteeism is rife. Gangsterism and poverty is having a very, very negative impact on our communities as well. From an economic perspective, too, you find that companies are not investing in the community. Exactly as Sherwin said, there's no opportunities for our youth. There's not enough skills programs that's happening. There's not enough recreational facilities for them because of the apartheid legacy and poor spatial planning in the community. There's no outlets for our children. So obviously they gather together. I know of young girls as young as 9 that would tell me they allow some of the older men to touch certain parts of their body just so that they can get food on the tables. So poverty is definitely a big factor that is driving the gangsterism in our communities.
And this is where I have a serious problem. And I want to come to you, Norman, because poverty, again, is not a new phenomenon. Poverty is not something that is peculiar to colored areas that are gangster-ridden. So what is going on in our communities whereby we cannot guide our 9 and 10-year-olds? What is going on?
I think I agree with some of the previous speakers when they said that the schooling system has failed our young people. Truancy levels are extremely high in Mitchells Plain. The school dropout rate is very, very high. There is no facilities, sports and other facilities in Mitchells Plain. So, and there's no plan, there's no integrated plan to deal with the issue of gangsterism. So, what I can say that this generational problem is serious, and many a young person don't really have a choice to belong or not to belong. Those decisions are made for you, and sometimes merely because you live in a particular part of the community, you automatically become a member, even if you're not the formal member. You will be targeted merely because you live in a particular community. So I think there's no plan from government in a serious way to look at gangsterism holistically and in a sustainable way. So that because poverty is one item, but the unemployment is right, the people's, even the morale of people is very low. And so you tend to not to aim high. People are not exposed to opportunities. So I think it's not an issue that can merely be addressed through law enforcement. It must be integrated, and we must address the root causes of gangsterism.
Right, and of course we will continue this. We just need to take a break, but I obviously want to come back and look at what are some of the solutions that we could possibly have here, because it just sounds surreal if I listen to all of you and what you are saying. And we need to get real with ourselves on the ground about these problems, and talk to the issue of teen pregnancy, for example, the drug abuse, and how this is also fueling some of the issues that we see. But of course, we need to take a quick break here on Morning Live, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. We're focusing on gang violence, and this is, of course, a sustained crime focus here on the SABC News channel for the week. But we have communities across the country that have for years been grappling with gang violence, and we're trying to focus and look at what some of the causes may be, but hopefully also try and find some solutions for this. Let's continue after the break. And welcome back. Thanks for being with us here on Morning Live. And this morning we're joined by Norman Jantjes, Chairperson of the Mitchells Plain Community Policing Forum. That's in the Western Cape. Sherwin Nel speaks to us from the community of Gelvandale in the Eastern Cape, where he's a community leader. We also have Celeste King, a youth activist and community member from Wentworth in KZN, and Lynn Wykes is a community worker from Westbury here in Gauteng. Thanks so much to all of you. And of course, we also have our question of the day looking at this particular matter. We're asking you, what are you doing in your community to try and curb the plague of gang violence and crime? Of course, if there's gangsterism in your area, if not, speak to the broader issue of crime. And let's just take a look at some of those responses. Now, this one's from Sekhwate, who says, good morning, Tobela, my beloved. In my village, Mohapeng, we don't have gangs, even though thieves are there, but we work together as a community to destroy the stealing. I call upon all parents and not to protect and speak for their kids. That's from Sekhwati. And then this one is from Kolile, who says, morning to you all. We create clean open spaces like the walkways that we used in the past for as crime activities and dumping sites, to change these spaces where people can actually use them now for education and tourism purposes in Guguletu. Hashtag Itemba Walkway. That's from Kolile in Guguletu. And then moving on to Elias, who says, morning SK, gang violence is a pandemic and difficult to curb. Community levels as well, we fall victim to these gangsters. We need visible policing in our communities and units dealing with gangsterism working together with community policing forums. That's from Elias. And Butle says, good morning, Basali. I think we can start by equipping communities with the resources. Sports and culture are great ways to unite our community. Also target I can't see that word, to raise awareness and restore dignity in poor communities. One, on a strategic level, improve police training. That's from Buhle. So just a quick one now. We are going to show you live visuals right now from Eldorado Park. And this is where the funeral service of a 4-year-old little girl is taking place today. As you can see there, it's always the worst thing to see a little casket, and this 4-year-old girl literally falling prey to all of the things that we're discussing today, the drugs, the crime, in our communities and how ultimately they manifest by killing our children, as it were. So let me get back to our panel. Celeste, just coming to you, just to give you an opportunity to also weigh in, but to talk about drugs and how drugs actually fuel a lot of the ills in our society.
As I mentioned, the main one was like poverty and the other social ills that youngsters face as teenage pregnancy, because they're coming from these backgrounds of where there's no sustainability in the home, and many occasion parents, some of them never went to school, some of them were drug addicts, some of them were alcoholics. So that all leads to these different social ills that youngsters face. One does run a youth organization, and we are currently founded by social development, and one must applaud them for the fundings that they give to us. But although it's not much, because we can't do much programs, especially when we go, like we run these programs or awarenesses in the community or even in schools to try, to minimize youngsters into joining gangs, to minimize the teenage pregnancy, to minimize bad behavior. But it isn't much, because even like business-wise, we have businesses, local businesses. Wentworth is surrounded by all these factories, but they cannot give back into the community. And it even makes it worse. We go knocking on these doors, but we get no help. Even with the police, law enforcement, we work hand in hand with them, but we don't see much of them. When all this takes place, they know it to be found. Only after action they will come. So it's really hard and it's really sad when we see youngsters going through these different social ills. We have a youth as the age of 13-year-old getting pregnant, and it's hard and it's painful, because you can see, okay, this as a generation of poverty coming into another generation of poverty. So it's a cycle that's keep going on and on and on.
And I want to touch on that, because, we speak about intergenerational poverty, but it also sounds as though we have resigned ourselves to the fact that this is normal. And right there lies a bigger problem, that we've normalized abnormal things. It should never be normal for a 13-year-old to be pregnant. And yet in our communities, this is a daily occurrence. We don't even understand, we don't even know the law and how the law compels us to all be responsible when a 13-year-old is pregnant, because we have a duty to report, we have a duty to follow up. If this child has been raped, we all are responsible for making sure that there's justice for this child, because at 13, you're a child, and then we have children having children, and we wonder why we have these problems. Sherwin?
Yeah, I think it needs a serious conversation. One of the things that we lack in our communities is the ability to have those open and frank discussions. There's a lack of educational programs around this issue of teenage pregnancy, and the fact that we have, like you said, normalized it. And the only way to combat that is to have a serious, open and frank discussion. I think some of the parents also need to be educated. We have young parents, and unfortunately you see that the cycle continues. And everybody has a role to play. The religious community has a role to play. NPOs has a role to play. The education system has a role to play. Families themselves have a role to play. And, it's difficult when there's a lack of resources to help aid these kind of programs in our community. And when you find yourself having to dig deep, as an individual effort, it also requires a community collaboration. And communities really need to come together and start supporting these kind of programs, because ultimately it affects the community and the makeup of that community.
I want to challenge all of you, and I want to challenge everybody who's watching here this morning, that, Lynn, this is not even about a conversation. This is about the community doing the right thing, so that when you see an 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old pregnant, you go and you report it. We don't need to have a conversation about it. It must be reported, and it must be followed up upon.
That's true. That is very true. But I think what happens in the community, silence is used as a strategy to perpetuate what happens in our communities. So many of us, we know who the drug lords are. We know who the gangsters are, but people don't speak out. Why? Because of fear of retribution. The police is perceived as working with these drug lords, working with these gangsters, so people are afraid to speak out. And the second problem that we have in our communities, many of these drug lords, they take care of our community, as strange as what that sounds. So as much as they are destroying our communities, but when funerals need to take place, you find that they pay for that. I'd like to know Celeste's take on the Queen of the South from Wentworth. When I looked at her video, she would support the community in Wentworth. So you find that many of these gangsters or drug lords, they buy food, they give the community money, and what can the community do? They depend on those resources. You also find that within our communities, there's many NPOs that are doing amazing work. But like our previous speaker said, Sherwin, there's just not enough resources. And I also think there's not enough coordination between government, businesses, and the community members to put effective, meaningful programs into place to try and change what is happening in our communities.
I hate that we are, but we are running out of time. I want to hear Celeste and, of course, Shane Norman very quickly, because I think the thing is, I hear all of what you are saying, and it's very real, the fear of retribution. All of these are realities on the ground. But have we just given up as communities? Have we surrendered our communities to the gangsters and the criminals? I'm going to give you a minute each because we are running out of time. Norman?
Yeah, I think to a large extent that is correct. We have surrendered our communities. The exciting thing about Mitchell's Plain, we were talking earlier about an integrated approach, government and civil society and business. And we are in the process of developing a Mitchell's Plain safety and development plan, where we look at jobs, we look at the whole control of guns, because there's too many firearms in our area. And how do we deal with that? And even the thing of toy guns. So we're in the process of developing a safety plan, and it involves civil society organizations, NGOs, CPF, neighborhood watch groups, as well as government. And government is playing a key role. And I think that is the only lasting solution. So it's still early days, we're still developing a plan, but we hope to start seeing some results in the foreseeable future.
Celeste, you have a minute.
Okay, I'll say yes, we have surrendered. The reason why I'm saying that, because looking at the rate of the gang violence, it's like increasing. And as community members, we are not taking ownership of our community, because at the end of the day, this is our community. And if we don't take ownership or take a step forward towards what's going on in our community, we are failing the generation. And one must fear, I fear that history will judge us on what we do as activists of our communities.
Well, thank you so much to our panel this morning for shining a spotlight on these socio-societal ills, socio-economic ills as well, that are very real. But of course, it's a daunting prospect dealing with all of this. But I hope that it's a start where we start talking about it and start acting upon finding solutions. But thank you so much to our panel of guests this morning from communities across the country who've been grappling with gangs and gang violence and crime. And we had Norman Jantjes, Chairperson of the Mitchell's Plain Community Policing Forum, and Sherwin Nel, a community leader from Galvandale in the Eastern Cape. Celeste King is a youth activist and community member in Wentworth in KZN, and Lynn Wykes, community worker from Westbury here in Gauteng.